Our next session is the round tables, where we'll be discussing some of these issues in round table groups, and each table will have a facilitator on the table to help lead and structure the conversation. And Pam and Paul are two of our facilitators, and Fiona and I thought it would be really nice if we just had a little bit of a 5-minute chat with both of them to explain their backgrounds, where they came from, and what they can add to our amazing conversations that we've been having today. So if I introduce you two first, welcome, by the way. Thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to have you here in London on a sunny day. So Pam, you are a highly experienced K-12 educational professional. You've got specialism in early years. You are also a very well-known author internationally and a speaker, and she's globally recognised for her specialism in the development of international education and school startup. And you've got particular experience in Southeast Asia, in the UEA, Latin America, China and the USA. And you operate at the very highest level strategically, and have helped a wide range of international schools, business groups and educational organisations. And Paul comes from the entertainment industry. You're an HR professional. Jazz hands, yeah, like it. You're an HR professional. You've got lots of experience in devising and implementing learning and development strategies for global live entertainment business. You've worked in the theatre industry for over 20 years. And you've had leadership roles in sales and ticketing before moving into HR. And you're now Group Head of Talent at ATG Entertainment, which is a major live entertainment organisation which has recently massively increased in size, isn't it? Which I assume means your job has massively increased.
That's right, it's got bigger.
Yes. Yeah. Great. So, well, maybe we start with you, Paul. One of Paul's key roles is to identify talent early on and nurture and create the leaders of the future. And one of the issues that lots of organisations face at the moment is rising costs and cost cutting. Why do you think continuing to invest in talent management and leadership training is so important, even in this economic climate?
Well, it just pays off in untold amounts, really. We started off this process 10 years ago because we didn't know where our future leaders were in the business, and we got curious about that. And so it was really important when we were designing our very first programme was to involve the business in the whole process, actually. So it was designed in a very specific way to be an inclusive process. So we invited managers from all over the business to get involved, to almost think about, well, what does great leadership look at our organisation? And that's what started the whole process off. So we involved the business in the process. What was interesting, I think, and I can only speak for the theatre industry, is that my experience of management and leadership up to that point was that senior leaders tended to think that they had done their learning on the job. And it was kind of like, well, I've done it. So, you know.
I'm a leader now.
I'm a leader now.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the kind of theme of our table discussion is lifelong learning, and I just so passionately believe in that because you never stop learning. What happened at the end of the first 2 years of our Emerging Leaders programme is we asked our young emerging leaders to do presentations on their leadership journey, you know, what kind of leader they were, and what they'd learnt. And every single presentation was totally different. They were totally authentic. They stepped into their power and their space. And beforehand, we'd have people who were physically feeling like they were going to be sick before they presented, to get to a stage where they felt so passionate and motivated to do it and tell their story. It had this incredible impact because all the senior leaders came up to me afterwards and said, Paul, I want to learn how to speak and present like that. And Paul, I want to learn this kind of stuff. When can we have some development like this? Which is incredible, really, because I think received wisdom would say, you should start at the top and work down. I guess my message is that doesn't have to be the case. Actually, you could start anywhere in an organisation, but tell the stories, or better still, allow the people to tell their stories themselves with real authenticity and passion. That does the work for you.
Now, you work in a very creative industry, and so already you've got that kind of culture there where you want people to be authentic and innovative. But are there any sort of messages or lessons that you can pass on to perhaps more, I don't want to use a word that's derogatory, but perhaps a more kind of staid or a sort of legacy industry where we don't have all that creativity?
Well, generally I've heard this a lot about, oh, well, you work in a creative industry, but don't forget the people that choose to work behind the scenes aren't always very creative.
Yeah, true.
So actually there are similar barriers, I think, to creativity. But what I've found in the style of leadership event that we create within our business is that it's often those more left field interventions, or getting someone to draw a picture, or getting somebody to write expressively about something. It gets to something much deeper. You're using a different part of your brain, I think. So, and it's always really, it's been a wonderful experience running some of our senior leadership programs. And you kind of pigeonhole people beforehand and say, oh, that person's never going to do this, or they work in finance, or there's an accountant here, they're never going to be able to do it. It's often those people that open up the most. And, I'll never forget one presentation where a guy who said, oh, I'm really just spreadsheets. He did this incredible presentation about his relationship with his daughter, and how he chose a piece of music to represent his leadership style. And it was so beautiful. People were crying listening to him speak. And he showed so much more of himself. And I remember someone leant over and said, I've known you for 10 years, and I feel like I've finally seen you.
Wow.
I mean...
And that feeds into what Mark was saying earlier, which is that actually there is a huge benefit in men being free to be more authentic.
Absolutely. And equally about women having the confidence to step into their power at an early stage. So that's what I saw on Emerging Leaders programme. One of the very first participants, she was nearly sick before presentations, and she actually ran out of one in our
practice.
Yeah, in our practice. But by the end, people were noticing in meetings how she was presenting in a totally different way, that she was doing it in an authentic way that felt true to herself. And now she's leading a really prestigious venue in London, and people come to her for advice, coaching and support. And that's a key thing as well, I think, coaching as a skill for leaders. And I think looking back, I could see that in the past, the old paradigm of leadership was, I'm the leader, I've got the title, I've got the bigger brain, I have to be a walking encyclopedia of answers. And that's just not true, and it's silly, actually. Because if you've got...
control.
Exactly. If you've got a team full of people, if you've got 10 people in the room, and you as the leader go in and say what you think first, you're potentially shutting down and losing 10 people's creative ideas that could end up making the difference between, failure and huge success. So you'd be a fool not to maximise on that and harvest people's creativity from whatever background they come from. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's really interesting. Pam, you've worked in some very tough locations, and it has been traditionally men that have done those kind of assignments in those sorts of countries. I think Sue was asking the question, what can we do to increase equity in the workplace? What can we do to hear diverse voices? And what can we do to get women to take on more of these international roles? Having been through this and having coached people through it, what would be your advice and your thoughts on that?
I think there are a couple of things really. Number one, I should confess now, no spreadsheets. I should also confess I have no sense of geography and not a huge amount of political awareness, plus terminal curiosity. And put those together, which is what's led me to the places that I've worked in. So, pretty much like Cynthia and other people who've spoken today, I didn't plan my career, I fell into them. So I'd love to say I'm a pioneer and I wanted to rush out there and make sure that women had a place at the table. I didn't. They happened to me. But what I would say is, of all the places I've worked in, all the experiences I've had, I have never gone into them thinking, oh, I'm a woman, so there won't be any reason for me to do this. However, part of my role, part of my work, I'm an early childhood specialist, which in many arenas is akin to saying I have leprosy. And it usually makes people recoil. So I could be sitting in a meeting with high finance and they'll say, oh, Pam, what's your background? And it's often a male setting. And if I say, oh, I'm an early childhood specialist, one of two things happens. Either, oh, and there's someone more interesting over here, or, oh, I've got a 3-year-old and suddenly I'm a therapist. But all of those have taught me an awful lot about saying to women that might have conversations with me, and I don't profess to be a coach, I just answer questions. I would say, it doesn't matter who or what you are. Someone has to be the Prime Minister, let's not discuss that. Someone has to be the President. Why not you? Now, not everyone can do that. Not everyone can be a celebrity. Not everyone can be this, that, and the other. However, it has to be a why not? And I think that's the biggest piece. And I also think is this following what's interesting, and Cynthia referenced some of the things that she's done. We worked together in NEOM in adversity, shall we say. But I think the one thing that you have to do is to say, well, I don't know about that. I can learn it, but I'll bring to it the skills that I do have too. So you have a whole plethora. So it's about looking inside, seeing what you've got and how you can translate that to another territory. And particularly, I think, it is just being open-minded and wanting to do different things. And I know one of the perceived difficult locations, and of course it depends what you read in the press, is Nigeria. And I remember being in a room full of people and we were being trained to deliver a particular curriculum. The question was, are there locations that any of you would not work in, particularly as women? And he said, for example, Nigeria, who would work in Nigeria? And I thought, oh, I don't know where that is. I put my hand up and there's this horrible moment. I thought, how come no one else has put their hand up? And I remember I had virtually not left the room before the guy rang me and said, what do you do next Thursday? And from that point on, in fact, and this is quite shocking actually, because I rang my husband and said, guess what, I'm going to Nigeria, where is it? And he told me, and he told a friend that evening, and the friend said these words, and if you knew my husband, you would know why he answered the way he did. What? Why are you letting her go to Nigeria? Two answers. Number one, you try and stop her, mate. And the other was, well, if she comes back, she comes back. If not, it'll be a great ransom. So I think from that perspective, it's about a level of courage that isn't foolish, but actually says, what are the opportunities? What will I learn? And that's what I would always say to other women, to colleagues of mine. That's what I think.
And how can we support women in those locations when they're there? Do they need to have cross-cultural training before they go? Do they need some sort of support when they're there? What would you suggest?
I think you can do lots of cross-cultural training. I think there's some very good, it was referenced earlier on, there's some very good information out there. I certainly wouldn't be looking at the Foreign Office website, which has the same thing on absolutely everyone. High risk of terrorism, wear sunglasses, which is no good at all. But I do think it's important because there's culture with the big C, and there's culture with the small c. There's the one that everyone needs to be aware of. But I think the best learning is to be with people in that context and learn from them. And people have different ways of doing business. They have different ways of doing leadership, different ways of supporting people. Listen and look and think. And if you're not sure, ask the questions of those people who actually live and work there. That's the best guidance I've ever had, and it's the one I pass on all the time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both of you, for those insights. Really helpful.